And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to the first episode of 2017 of the Hoosier Life. Josh and I are back in Bloomington. We've got classes starting up tomorrow for our live audience. It's Sunday night here, a cold Sunday night with some snow on the ground in Bloomington. But yeah, we got classes tomorrow. We're back after a nice 3-4 week hiatus after finals and break and everything. And the Hoosiers and the sports world really as a whole had quite the eventful end to 2016, and we're going to break it all down for you, what to expect in the next coming days with the national championship game on Monday night with IU hoops, and then IU football, how they ended their season and how we expect them to move forward starting next year. So we've got that all on tap for you. But Josh, how was your break? How did it go? I know you were on the call last night or Saturday night, I guess it was, for those listening to the podcast, of that Illinois and then IU game in Assembly Hall. So was it nice to be back? How did it look for conference play?
Yeah, it was good to be back. I didn't really watch much of that Nebraska game, which I'm kind of glad of. I was out of town for that one, but there was a good little week stretch in there where there was no IU sports. It was good to just get a little bit of a break, but then getting back to it, that night of the 28th was kind of a rough one. You had IU football losing the bowl game, the basketball team losing, but the women did get their first win on the road at Penn State, so I guess they kind of saved IU in that respect. But last night, though, Saturday night, they got back on track a little bit. We'll dive into a little bit more of that coming up in the show.
Exactly, and it was an eventful couple weeks while we were off, especially for both those basketball teams. Both of them had a doubleheader on CBS on New Year's Eve before the college football playoff, and that's exactly what we're going to start with. The national championship tomorrow night, Monday night for those listening live. Well, it's Monday night for everybody, but it's tomorrow night for those of you listening live. And Josh, we're going to change this format up a little bit to preview this national championship game. And you're going to stick to Bama. I'll stick with Clemson. We're going to kind of each give one side of the story of this game and what you guys should know about each team. And then we'll dive into predictions, what we think is going to happen, how each team can win. So Josh, Bama's number one in the rankings. So why don't you start us off and go first here?
Yeah, I mean, I watched that entire game against Washington. Obviously, me being from Washington, family, big Washington fans, I watched that game from beginning to end. And if there's one part of the game where Clemson needs to take advantage of, it is the first part of the game. And Washington came out. They didn't look too intimidated. Actually, Alabama looked like the one that was kind of on their heels a little bit early in that game. Washington put up points on the board. They got 7 points. They're up 7-0. But then after that, Bama completely took over that game. Their defense kind of woke up. It felt like their offense started moving. They answered Washington right back with a touchdown after Washington went down and scored. And this Alabama team, what they are known for doing this year, they have a great offense. Obviously, they have multiple NFL players on that defense. And that defense is a big part of the story, that and their special teams, because they score the most non-offensive touchdowns in the nation by a huge margin. And that was a huge deal in that semifinal because that pick six late in the first half really kind of turned the tide in that game, no pun intended, really turned that game around because all of a sudden Washington was sort of driving right there. They were around midfield. They were going to get the ball to start the half, or excuse me, no, they weren't going to get the ball, but they were still driving at least a little bit. Instead, Alabama goes up 10, and that game's basically over after that. Washington could not muster anything, but it's the non-offensive touchdowns that Clemson has to be really cognizant of because we saw it last year in the title game. There was a big return for a touchdown that basically ended that game. That was the nail in the coffin. And that defense, they are always looking to strip the ball out, pick a ball off. They're going to do anything they can to get their hands on the football, and that's a really scary Alabama defense. That's where they start. Jonathan Allen, Reuben Foster, those two are two big players to watch for them.
Yeah, and I feel like, after watching Alabama dominate for the past, seems like forever, I always hear Reuben Foster's name. It feels like that guy's been there forever. That's just because of how effective he is. And, on that note of Alabama capitalizing on these turnovers, and first of all, I saw a tweet today, I think from Mike Greenberg, and it said that if Alabama had not scored a single offensive touchdown all season, their record would be 6-8, which is completely absurd how they can win 6 games without scoring an offensive touchdown. Now, Fortunately, unfortunately, depending on which side you're on, that's not the case. Alabama does have an offense and a very not explosive, but a very respectable and effective one at that. Bo Scarborough is the real deal. Jalen Hurts is to me the most impressive freshman quarterback that I've seen all year. I think that the way that he composes himself in the pocket and the patience that he has, his ability to make something out of nothing is nothing like I've ever seen from a freshman quarterback, especially with all that attention being in the cream and crimson of Alabama. But no, going back to what you said and piggybacking off that, Alabama's going to force turnovers. And this year, Deshaun Watson has been a little more careless with the ball. And he's thrown in more interceptions. We saw it against Ohio State. He threw a couple bad picks, one not so much his fault, but another one was his fault. He's not as careful with the football, and he's trying more home run balls, and he's trying to get a little more aggressive, and that could either pay off or it could come back to bite him in the butt against a team like Alabama, because this is a very disciplined Crimson Tide team that is going to capitalize on turnovers. They're going to force turnovers. It's a guarantee. So if Clemson wants to win this game, they cannot get blown out in the turnover department. Now, their offense is good enough. If you want to look at, if you're a big analytics guy or big analytics girl, Clemson has the edge on Alabama in what's called offensive efficiency by a decent margin. It's not much, but it's a decent margin. And while Clemson is top 10 in, I'm looking at this on ESPN, defensive efficiency, strength of record, and game control, they are 9th, 3rd, and 2nd in those. Alabama wipes the slate clean and is in first by a long shot in all 3 of those categories. And, it goes back to you talking about Alabama's defense. I think this is the best defense that we've seen from Alabama under Nick Saban. And it may honestly be, if they end up winning this game, it might be the best team. You could certainly throw them in the pot, the best team that college football has seen since 2000. If you want to throw 2005 USC in there, but they lost to Texas in the Rose Bowl. It's really between those two. This is an historically incredible team from Alabama. And if Clemson wants to win this game, it's going to start with that turnover battle. And if they can just tie the turnover battle, I think that's enough for them, because Alabama is anticipating winning it. And if Clemson can flip that in any way, whether it's they win the turnover battle, that's great. If they end up, 2 turnovers apiece, I think that's okay. If they can force turnovers, that is, because Alabama takes care of the ball incredibly well, especially with Jalen Hurts and how disciplined he is with the ball. And Bo Scarborough is not going to put that on the ground. But two names to watch, and then we can get more into this. 2 names to watch for Clemson are Clelin Ferrell, a defensive end. I think he's really underappreciated. I don't think a lot of guys are talking about him. He may make an impact on this game if he can get his hands on Jalen Hurts and force him to make some throws, while rushed. I think that could be the difference in this game. Force a 2nd, 3rd, and long that ultimately leads to 4th downs. And Ben Boulware, I can't overlook that guy. So that's 2 guys on Clemson's front 7 that are completely, they're ready to go. And Boulware's been here before. He was on Clemson last year. Farrell was redshirted. He's a redshirt freshman this year, but Boulware knows what he's doing. He's a ferocious defensive player. And I think that Clemson front 7 defensively is going to give that Alabama O-line a little bit of trouble. Not too much, because we know how good that O-line is, but I think they're going to give them a little bit of trouble. And if they can just put the pressure on Jalen Hurts early and often, while also kind of shutting down that run game as best they can, they could put themselves in position, to win this game if their offense can execute, that is. Then that's not a given.
Yeah, and this game I feel like is going to be won on the defensive side of the ball. We know both these offenses can score a lot of points. Alabama, if they need to make this an offensive game, they can make it an offensive game. They can use Jalen Hurts. They can use their weapons on the outside. Clemson can definitely do the same, but this game's going to be won on defense because, I mean, you just mentioned a couple of those Clemson guys. They're a year older. They played in this game last year. They know what they need to do. I feel like they belong. They know that they belong now. Last year was their first time in the championship in quite some time, maybe even ever. I just don't feel like they were ready for that game last year. This year, they're a year older. They're a year more mature. They know what they need to do to beat this Alabama team. And you were talking about it with the turnovers. Clemson cannot get baited into those turnovers. Alabama will tell you, don't turn the ball over. You can see it in the stats. You see it all over the place. And if anybody's breaking this game down, they have to talk about those turnovers because Alabama scores so many non-offensive touchdowns. If Clemson loses that turnover battle, there's no chance they win the game. I'm agreeing with you that if they do tie that turnover battle, I think they'll be okay, but they need to find a way to force some turnovers on their own. Washington did not do a good job of that, and that's why they lost by 17. Washington, I think they were one of the top teams in the country in turnover margin, and you saw what that Alabama team did to them. I'm not comparing Washington to Clemson, because Clemson definitely deserves their spot in the national championship, but you have to win that turnover battle. It's huge. If you tie it, you'll be right there. But I think if you want to win this game and knock off this historic Alabama team, as you were saying, you got to find a way to cause turnovers, and you cannot give the ball away. That's an absolute no-no. Going into play Alabama, that's the first thing you've got to talk about is don't turn the ball over, because that Alabama team is going to turn that into points.
Yeah, and something that you speak that the game is going to rely on the defensive side of the ball. Something that's impressed me from Clemson this year is how much better their defense is than last year. Last year's championship game was 45-40. It wasn't as close as the score indicates. Alabama pretty much had it in the second half, but still a 5-point game. And I think that this Clemson team, if they give up 45, the game's over. They're not gonna score more than 45 on this Alabama defense. But I don't see them letting up 45 points in this one. Like I said, Ben Boulware, Cleveland Farrell, they're great. And if they can get to Jalen Hurts, like I said, when he drops back, and that's after, if they can stop Bo Scarborough in that running game of Alabama on first down. Because what you see with Alabama is what you're going to get. They're just better than you at everything. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, and they're smarter than any team in the entire country. They're, without a question, the best football team that college football has to offer. Now, it's just a matter of if Clemson can kind of out-scheme them and make one more play, because talent-wise, they're pretty close. But, Alabama, they're not going to try and trick you. They're going to play their game. And Dabo Swinney, he played them last year. There's a lot of the same pieces here, like Calvin Ridley. Bo Scarborough had a nice game last year, nice end of the season. Like you said, Jonathan Allen, Reuben Foster. He's got Mika Fitzpatrick. And those guys, like I said, feel like they've been there forever. Those guys are experienced as well. But it's going to come, like you said, from those senior leaders on Clemson. And I really think they have a chance to make this a game. My eyes tell me that Alabama's going to dominate this for almost the full 60 minutes. But, thinking about that Washington game, Washington did not play that poor of a game. They made a couple mistakes on a couple plays, and Alabama happened to score on 2 of those 4 plays. So it's just unfortunate, and just how good Alabama is. Now, there is a significant gap. It's not that big because we're talking about number 2 versus number 4, but there is a decent gap between the level of Washington and the level of Clemson. Just like there's a big difference between Ohio State and Alabama. I think Ohio State was a little overrated. I think they're still a top 5 team, and that's a fantastic win for Clemson, especially the way they did it. But there's a large gap for Alabama, between beating Washington the way they did and if they want to beat Clemson the way they want to beat Clemson. And the same goes for Clemson and beating Ohio State. If they want to beat Alabama, they're going to have to play better. But they played a great game, and especially defensively. So if they can ride that wave of momentum, they made JT Barrett look completely lost. And that's tough to do because he's an experienced guy and a talented guy and a two-dimensional quarterback. So they made him look lost. I think they can get the pressure on Jalen Hurts. But, again, it starts with stopping Bo Scarborough on first down, and they cannot get beat deep. If they can stop Bo Scarborough in that running game, no big play is there or through the air, I think they'll be okay, and I really think that they could win this game. But, looking at it right now, no one's done it this year, so I have no reason to believe that Clemson won't have any trouble doing that. I think they're going to. I don't think they will, but if they're going to, it's going to start there. Limit the run game and limit the big plays.
Yeah, and another thing, just piggybacking off of that, is getting off the field on third down is going to be monumental for this Clemson team, because you saw it in that Washington game. There was a 3rd down and 9. Alabama was at their own, or they were at least inside the 5-yard line. It was 3rd down and 9, and Bo Scarborough rips off about a 10-yard run. They get a first down, and then he scores that amazing 50-yard touchdown later in the drive. That basically was game over at that point. If Washington could have gotten off the field at that point, Alabama would have been punting out of their own end zone. They would have had good field position. They could have gotten back in that game. It was only 17-7 at that point, and they could have made that at least a one-possession game. Instead, they blow it open at 17 points, and that game's basically over. Getting off the field on third down is going to be paramount. This Clemson defense has really not played a team like Alabama this year. Really, unless you played Alabama themselves, you have not played a team like Alabama. This team is far and away better than any other team in college football. It's up to Clemson, though, to limit the mistakes. If you make mistakes against this team, it's over. You said it. Washington played a great game, but they still made 2 key mistakes in that game, and it was over. You cannot make a mistake against this team. If you do, this game's over. Alabama's going to lift their second trophy in 2 years. No mistakes, and you might have a chance to win. And that's even just a might of a chance. You may not even beat this Alabama team just because of how good they are. Their depth is incredible. I'm not trying to say Clemson is not going to get this done, because I do think they do have a solid shot, and more of a shot than they did last year. I'm just saying they cannot make mistakes. You saw what Washington did. They only made a few, and they still lost by 17.
Yeah, and that's what worries me. You look at Deshaun Watson, he's thrown 17 interceptions this year. Now, he backed that up with 38 touchdowns and over 4,000 yards passing with a 67% completion percentage. But 17 interceptions in 14 games is not good, and no matter which way you look at it. And, you know, he did throw it more often this year compared to last year. He went more towards the pass and less running it. And Wayne Gallman had a great year on the ground, too, 16 touchdowns already. I expect him to find the end zone again. But what Clemson did not have going for them last year is Mike Williams, and that's their stud receiver. And he has 90 catches for almost 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. And this guy, he's a stud. He's the whole package. And I think that he could be that difference maker for Clemson. You look at last year, he was only on the field for 2 receptions. He missed the entire season. And he's 6'3". He's got decent size. He's got great speed and fantastic hands. He's going to be a pretty good receiver at the next level. But, I mean, I think he could be the X factor here. I'm looking at him outside of the obvious Jalen Hurts, Deshaun Watson, Bo Scarborough. Throw those guys out of the equation. I think the 2 X factors, one for each team. For Clemson, it's going to be Mike Williams. And I think for Alabama, if Calvin Ridley can have a good game, if he can find the end zone, because I don't think that Clemson's going to have him on their number 1, must-watch list. I think he could be closer to 2 or 3. I don't think that secondary is going to be as worried about him as other guys like O.J. Howard. But if Calvin Ridley can break out for Alabama and make a big play, or if Mike Williams can break out for Clemson and make a big play, that's what might make the difference.
And he's a really interesting guy, Mike Williams. He's a big play receiver. He's going to be there on the outside, and he's going to be the one that is kind of forcing this secondary that's missing one of their best defensive backs in Jackson. I can't remember his first name. His last name's Jackson, number 4. He is one of their best players. He's out for the season, but Eli Fitzpatrick has stepped in. It is Eddie Jackson. Thank you for that. But Eli Fitzpatrick, he played a great game against Washington on New Year's Eve. He's probably going to have the assignment potentially of Mike Williams, and that's going to be a matchup to really watch. But another guy that I'm really keying in on, and I know that Clemson, it's probably right at the top of their scouting report, and that is Jonathan Allen on the defensive line. If he gets loose in this game, it's going to be really it's going to be troublesome for this Clemson team, because he's going to cause havoc in there in the middle. He's going to get after Deshaun Watson. He's a big guy. He can still chase down a quarterback like the best of them. That's going to be a really interesting matchup to watch, him against that offensive line and Deshaun Watson. But if I had to make a pick in this game, I think I'm still going to go with Alabama. The line is set at about 6 right now. I do expect Clemson to cover that. I really do think Clemson's going to keep this close, but in the end, it's just Alabama's just too much for this Clemson team, and they're going to come away with the win.
Yeah, I would love to see Clemson make this a game, just because I love good TV, and this is a great matchup, something that we're probably not going to get again for a little bit with the names that we have and how talented both these teams are and how well coached they are. We're very fortunate to get this matchup again for a second year, and usually rematches, when you get 2 coaches, if you get a rematch at a stage like this, it usually ends in a well-played, hard-fought game, and the winner is the team that deserves it, and it's never really a fluke. But I just don't see Clemson winning this game, and it would be awesome for them to do it, because I think the guys deserve it. I think Dabo's a hell of a coach, and he's coached his tail off the past 2 years to kind of shed the reputation that Clemson has and Clemson has had in the past of, this whole Clemsoning thing and not being able to win the big one. Well, look, they've gotten to the national championship 2 years in a row, and they've won a semifinal game to do it, which not many teams in the history of the sport can say that. So that label is shed, but that next big step for them is winning that national title. And this is, I think, as great a chance as they'll ever have. I don't think they'll ever have a quarterback like Deshaun Watson. Their front seven is as talented as a front seven outside of Alabama as there is in the country. And I think their offensive line is going underappreciated. I think they can control Jonathan Allen and maybe make this game interesting. But I just haven't seen the consistency from Clemson this year. They have the pieces to make this a game, but I right now sitting here, I can't predict that they'll win the game and then prove it to you, other than using the argument of they have the pieces, which they do, but I just don't see it. And Josh, quite frankly, I see Alabama covering that 7-point spread. Every analytic website I'm looking at has Alabama by at least 6.5 points. So I see them taking this, and I'll give you the points.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would not be surprised. I just feel like Clemson, though, they lost last year to the same Alabama team. I feel like they're going to have a chip on their shoulder coming into this game. This is Deshaun Watson's last game, most likely. He's going out the door next, and it's just this is kind of their last chance. The window could be closing. I don't know who Clemson has as a backup, but it's probably not anybody like Deshaun Watson. He's a special kind of quarterback. You're not going to have him much longer. This is his last game, so he's going to want to go out on top. There's so many players that want to get some redemption on this Alabama team. It'll be interesting to watch, but that spread is right at a good number where it could go either way.
Yeah, I'm with you. And before we move on to IU hoops, I just want to echo a point that you made. One last thing. If Clemson's going to win this game, I'll tell you right now, because we both picked Alabama. If Clemson's going to win this game, it's because they shut Alabama down on third downs. If Clemson's going to win this game, it's because Alabama was not able to convert on most of their third downs. So I'm going to leave it there. That's going to be our final thought, Josh, unless you have anything else. He's shaking his head no, so we're going to move on. So there we go. Again, that game Monday night at 8 Eastern. Hopefully it's a good one. But let's hit IU football. We'll stay on the gridiron, and we'll keep this kind of short, not too long. But I mean, yeah, we saw the bowl game, and it wasn't too pretty, and it was kind of like what we saw all year from Indiana, both offensively and defensively. Kind of let the team jump ahead and then climb back, give yourself a shot, and there's just not enough time on the clock. Richard Lego made some bad throws. He made some good throws. We could dissect this game all we want, but it's in the past. This team's going to have a brand new look next year, especially with, Rashard Fant coming back, but Divine Redding gone, Marcus Oliver gone. That's all we know right now. Anything could happen from now till the draft. But Josh, initial takeaway from you, I would say, what was your initial takeaway from the bowl game? And then give me one thought that you've got, anything you want to get out there regarding going into next season, how they're opening the year, what their identity is going to be offensively or defensively or both. Just give me one thought of the bowl game and a quick little teaser question that we can look forward to going into next season.
My one takeaway from this bowl game, and I hate that this is what it is, but I feel like that entire 60 minutes was IU season wrapped up into that entire game. There were just some mistakes in that game. The clock management didn't change there at the end. It was just so many things that frustrated you throughout the season. They were like, oh, we can fix these as we move along in the season, and they just never were fixed. And it was really too bad to see them lose the way they did. They potentially had a chance at a last-second drive. They missed another field goal. Just everything that went wrong this season was in that one game, and it was just unfortunate to see Tom Allen lose that game, see the seniors lose that game, because they were so close to beating another top 25 team. They came so close this season so many times, and even last season, and they just couldn't get it done. This game was the exact same. But then moving forward into next season, I'm really interested to see what this new offense is going to look like. You're not going to have Divine Redding. You have a new offensive coordinator. Is it going to be Richard Lego at quarterback? Is it going to be one of the redshirt freshmen that come in there? There's so many question marks on this team. Is Camion Patrick going to be the starting running back? Who's going to replace Ricky Jones? Who's going to replace Mitchell Page? There's so many questions on that offensive side of the ball. Not as many on the defensive side of the ball. I know Marcus Oliver has declared for the draft. I'd be surprised if Tigray Scales did. I feel like he's going to be back in Bloomington next year. Rashard Fant's going to be back. There's some good players still on this team. The defensive line's taking a hit with the loss of Ralph Green. I feel like the defense is going to be what this team is known for next year. They have those players in place. Tom Allen is still a good defensive coach. but it's just on that offensive side of the ball. There's too many question marks. It just wasn't that great this season after what it was a season ago. So that's where my biggest question mark is what is this offense going to look like?
True, and they're getting a few weapons back offensively next year. You touched on the defensive guys, but Simi Cobbs was out all year, so they certainly missed him this year, and we'll see if he can make an impact next year. But Camion Patrick, and that's a name that a lot of IU fans have been tossing back and forth basically since the start of Big Ten play when Michigan State came to town, and rightfully so. He was a highly recruited guy. He's a beast of an athlete, a freak athlete. Built like a tank and is one of the fastest guys on the field. And this is a guy that Kevin Wilson was super high on, and they took him from Tennessee. And, Tom Allen's got some Tennessee guys with Tennessee roots now on his coaching staff. So, they see something with Camion Patrick. It's not like they're coming in and they haven't seen this guy before. They've looked at him. They recruited him. So, they know what they're getting with Camion Patrick. And this is a guy that can play receiver or running back. And there are guys on the football team that have said that Camion Patrick is the best football player that they've seen with their own two eyes in person. And take that if whether they mean it or not, that's incredibly high praise for someone, especially a guy that was battling an ACL tear. And, I think when he first hit the field, he was 6.5, 7 months off a torn ACL, where typical rehab is a minimum of 8. So we're talking about a freak athlete that got to play in the Big Ten, shortly after, in the process of rehabbing really a torn ACL. So I think that he could have a breakout year. So I'm happy you mentioned that name. You should keep tabs on that. Like we told you to keep tabs on Nick Westbrook, and he would make an impact this past season. I'd like to say that we're 1 for 1 in this. Let's go 2 for 2. Write down Camion Patrick and remember the name. He's going to make an even bigger impact on the team next year than Nick Westbrook did with this year's team, especially with the absence of Simi Cobbs. He was great, but next year, like you said, I think the question marks, they begin and end with Richard Lego. I think, sadly, that's the case. Running the ball this year, they didn't have a ton of success. It was kind of an ugly 1,000-yard season for Divine Redding, although 1,000 yards is nothing to be upset about. But, Lego was just all over the place. And the coaching staff met the media a couple days ago, and from what they talked about and what they said, it sounds like they're not too hot on Lego after this season, and rightfully so. He didn't have a great year. There's a lot to work on. So, they're going to work on him in the summer. They'll work on him in the fall, and, it's not even a given that he's going to win the quarterback battle. So that's going to be the biggest question mark, is the quarterback position. Everything else will settle itself. They've got good receivers. They've got good tight ends. They always have a good offensive line, and they've got a lot of pieces returning defensively. So I think the biggest thing, like you said, just going to echo your thought, is at the quarterback position. Who plays quarterback and how well do they play it? It's really that simple, because that was the one thing that kind of held Indiana back this year, was their poor quarterback play, and they couldn't run the ball because of it.
Yeah, and let me give you another name here, Peyton Ramsey. He redshirted this year. I've heard some things that he might be that next guy to replace Richard Lego, or even after Richard Lego leaves, where he comes in and he's a really good quarterback. But we're just going to have to see how that all plays out. But if just think about this. You had Nate Sudfeld on a team with a bad defense, and you had Richard Lego on a team with a good defense. Imagine a good defense, which is what you're going to have next year, with an offense that was at least a little bit more like that 2015 team. Just putting that in your mind, because that could – I sure hope that can get you to at least 7 wins, because that would be a special Indiana team and get back to another bowl. Tom Allen would take this team to another step up the ladder. And we haven't even talked about Kevin Wilson, who's going to be potentially coaching against Indiana on the first night of the season when Ohio State comes in here. So there's so many storylines going into next season, but it's going to be a very interesting offseason here in Bloomington. And Tom Allen does not yet have a defensive coordinator. So there's still one more coach and maybe a few more that have to be decided.
It's going to be interesting, and it's going to be an interesting and eventful offseason, kind of behind the scenes for everyone involved. And, like you said with Kevin Wilson, all these reports, he's going to be on the sidelines for Ohio State as their new offensive coordinator next season. And yes, like you said, Ohio State opens the season at Indiana on Thursday night under the lights. So that if that could be something just unbelievable, something like we didn't anticipate a month ago. So it could be unbelievable. Yeah, there are a lot of question marks. And we're not going to sit here and speculate on January 8th for our live audience of what's going to happen on August 31st or how they're going to look. But as things come out, obviously we're going to talk about that and tell you guys what you need to know. But right now we know what you know, which is nothing, and it's all speculation. So, until then, we gave you Camion Patrick to write down and remember. He's going to be the man next year. People are going to love him. And when we'll see who plays quarterback, and we'll go from there. We'll preview the football team later on into the summer and stuff like that. But right now, there's a more important team and a more perplexing team in Bloomington, and that is the men's basketball team. I mean, they're such a curious case right now. And there's the side that beat Kansas and North Carolina, and then there's the side that lost to Fort Wayne and Nebraska. And no one knows what to make of this team. And I don't think there's I'm going to come out and say it. I don't think that there's anything to make of this team. I don't really think they have an identity. This is not a good team with bad losses or a bad team with good losses. This is a different team every night. I mean, and it starts with the lack of leadership. I think that's the leading cause of this. It's obviously not the sole cause, but the lack of leadership is the main reason of this team's inconsistency. That's what this team is an inconsistent basketball team. They're not one or another that sometimes plays. They're not a good team that plays bad or vice versa. They're an inconsistent basketball team, and they have to get that together going forward. I mean, they held Illinois scoreless for 6 minutes and then let the Illini hang 80 on them. I mean, it's 34 minutes, Illinois scored 80 points. That's terrible, especially with Malcolm Hill in foul trouble. I mean, So there's a lot that we could talk about with this game. Josh, you had a closer look than I did. You were on the call for WIUX, so I'll let you take it from here of what you saw from that game, and then we'll kind of preview what they need to improve going forward to get into our Power 5 segment.
Well, if there's one thing to really take away from this game against Illinois, it was the insane amount of fouls called in this game. At the under 4 timeout, there were 52 fouls, and I'm sure there were a few more after that. There was just no flow to this game. I'm not going to blame that on Indiana or Illinois or the refs. It just was a thing that just happened. It was a little bit unfortunate. But the second thing is Tom Crean mentioned this in his post-game press conference. They had 37 deflections in the first half. In the second half, they had one single deflection on defense. And Tom Crean says that's where it is, right there. They just I don't know what happened. But you said it, in 34 minutes, they scored 80 points. That just literally cannot happen. That absolutely cannot happen. If this team wants to contend for a Big Ten title, which they're still in this thing because Purdue beat Wisconsin today, so then they pick up half a game on them. So they're still in this thing. There's so much parity in this Big Ten right now. They're still not out of the race. I do not expect them to win the conference, but they can still be up there, potentially fight for a top 4 seed and get that double bye in the Big Ten tournament. But it starts on the defensive end. You have to play defense. If you give up 80 points to an Illinois team that has scored 59 points and 75 points in their first 2 Big Ten games, you're not going to win very many games in the Big Ten. Going to Maryland, that's going to be a very tough test. It's on the road. Maryland's shown some signs of being a very good basketball team. They beat Illinois by 25. So Indiana's really going to have to step up their game a little bit, and it starts on the defensive end. And those deflection numbers, that is probably the one stat that you need to take away from this game and say that's what needs to be fixed, because you have 37 deflections in one half and you have 1 in the second half. That's just not going to work.
Yeah, I'm just going to touch on 2 things here, and then we can move on to the Power 5 unless you have something else to add at the end. One, I don't care. I don't give anything about deflections. I could not care less about how many deflections, Tom Crean, that you guys had comparing the first half to the second half. I could not care less. What I want to see is turnovers. And right now, your Hoosiers, Tom Crean, are committing more turnovers than they are forcing. You are going to have a very, very hard time beating good teams, let alone teams like Michigan and Northwestern and Maryland and Michigan State, teams that aren't even in the top 25. You're going to have a hard time beating those teams if you're losing the turnover battle on the hardwood. So I don't want to hear any other chatter from him about deflections and praising his team for 37 deflections and blaming the second half comeback because of 1. And, obviously that could be a sign of something bigger going on, but I want to see turnovers. And another thing that I've noticed from them that they've struggled with is more X's and O's on the ball screens, on ball screens. they are not communicating. And more often than not, the ball handler is either left with an open lane to drive, or the man who sets the screen is left to cut to the hoop or fade back and get a 15-foot jump shot, because there is no communication on ball screens. That was a tongue twister. If you've ever played basketball, you know that communication on screens is basketball 101. If you are playing man-to-man, which Indiana does most of the time, and there is a guy setting a screen on the point guard and you do not communicate, it's going to be total confusion with what to do defensively. And more often than not, both defenders are going to chase the ball. Or more often than not, both defenders are going to switch and stay back with the guy that set the pick. And if that happens, ball handler's got an easy layup. If you both go to the ball guy, the guy that set the pick is going to be wide open. And there's never communication there. I didn't see it last year. I saw it more toward the end of the year, but this year I haven't seen it at all. And to me, that's something that Indiana just has to improve on going forward, or they're going to continue to get burned and they're going to continue to let teams in this game. So I want to see them start communicating on the ball screens and making stops and committing turnovers. I'm sick of hearing these deflections, this deflection talk. I want to see turnovers.
Yeah, and I mean this Indiana program this year and last year, they have turned the ball over, and that's just something they've had to learn to play with. And it was a flaw last year that they learned to kind of get around that, because they did end up winning the Big Ten last year with these turnover numbers. It may not have been as bad, but they still learned how to play with the amount of turnovers they committed. And to your point on the screens, that was a huge point of emphasis on the broadcast last night. There were so many times when Maverick Morgan, and it just seemed to be Maverick Morgan so many times, he'd come up, set a screen, Deron Davis would hedge out way too far, and then all of a sudden Maverick Morgan's gone. He's wide open. There's nobody inside the three-point line to even guard him. That's something that definitely needs to be fixed moving forward. I hope this team buys into playing a little bit more defense, because if they do, this team has the potential. They just have to play a little bit more defense.
Exactly, and the pieces are there, but the sad and frustrating thing is it's just basketball 101. It's fundamentals that are letting them down, and it's communication. It's picking up your dribble before you know what to do with the ball. It's leaving your feet before you know what to do with the ball, speaking basically directly to James Blackman here. But it's just basketball fundamentals that they're lacking right now, and they're not playing like a Big Ten team should, especially with they've got 3 guys that could be in the NBA next year, and that we thought could be in the NBA next year, but they each have a lot to improve on. I mean, OG's not even in the starting lineup. He's not playing that well. Thomas Bryant is not playing that well. He's trying to be Kevin Durant and handle the ball in the corner when he should be sticking his butt in the paint and backing literally everyone in the country down, which he can do, but for some reason has decided I'd rather stay out on the wing and chuck up threes and try and make a play with dribbling as opposed to posting up. So there's a lot that they've got to fix, and you've heard all about it on the Assembly Call post-game show, so we're not going to talk about it anymore, but there's a lot to fix with this Hoosier team, and with the expectations so high, I think they're setting us up for disappointment. Obviously hope for the best and the talent they can flip this around almost overnight, and it starts with a road win at Maryland on Tuesday. But they have to take every game one game at a time, because right now they're just an inconsistent basketball team. So, all right, we're almost out of time. So it's time for the final segment, you know what it is, our weekly top 5 power ranking segment. We got a little creative this time, so I'll credit Josh with this one. As I seem to do most of the time, I always lean to him, and he's got something off the top of his head. So thank you for having my back every week with that, Josh. But we're talking right now the top 5 storylines or surprises in the college basketball season. So, Josh, we'll start this off. I'll start this one off, rather, and we can bounce back and forth. So, number 5 for me, I think just because of the attention that they got, especially with how local it is for us, I think number 5 has got to be the struggle of Indiana, or just kind of the roller coaster of a year that they've had. Just because, you guys know, I don't have to talk too much about this, but there was the OG hype going into the season, although it was completely unjust, and most of the guys doing that hype hadn't actually seen a second of him play. There was Thomas Bryant, who had lottery pick written all over him if he continued to improve. There was James Blackman coming back. There were a lot of pieces coming in. And look at that, they're a complete mess. They're an inconsistent mess right now. And they've turned the heads of a lot of people across the country, and rightfully so. They're a mysterious case right now. That a lot of people are keeping tabs on. So right now, the mysterious case of IU basketball is my number 5.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one that's sweeping the nation. What I basically just got five teams, whether good or bad, that have been kind of surprises for me. But coming in at number five, talk about Virginia Tech for a second. This is a program a couple of years ago. Buzz Williams came in, and this was just not a very good program. Seth Greenberg, he's great on ESPN. I think that's probably where he should stay. But he kind of left this Virginia Tech program in a pretty bad place. But Virginia Tech this year, 1-2 in the in the ACC, 12-3 overall. This is a team, if they can string together a few more wins in the ACC, they've already knocked off Duke. I know it was without Grayson Allen, but the committee looks at that and they say, "Oh, they beat Duke," so that's a good win on their schedule. It's their only ACC win as of yet. They're 12-3 overall, so they have that base of some good non-conference wins. They did beat Illinois, so I guess that's a pretty solid win right there. But this is a team that's kind of been surprising to me. I did not expect them to play up to this potential. But moving forward, this is going to be definitely a team to keep your eye on.
Without question. And my number four, sticking in the Big Ten, this could be the year of Chicagoland droughts being broken. I mean, don't look now, but Northwestern, they've got some work to do, but according to a lot of bracketologists, not all, but as of now, a lot of bracketologists have Northwestern in the field, and as most of you probably know, this would be the first time in school history, despite hosting the first Final Four, that Northwestern will make the NCAA tournament if it happens. They have never done it, and they've got the pieces, and they don't really have the health, but they've got the pieces and a pretty light schedule in the Big Ten, given how crazy it is. And they're sitting at double-digit wins. They had a good win at Nebraska today, which certainly doesn't hurt their resume, but I'm not saying it is the year. It was for the Cubs, so who's to say it's not for Northwestern? That would be a huge, huge story across the country for them to finally break that long, long drought. So that's my number four. It's a potential storyline going forward.
I had a feeling they would make this top five list, but they are definitely well-deserved, and they're well on their way to potentially an NCAA tournament bid. My number four, I'm going with the team that has surprised me in a very bad way, and that's Georgetown. This Georgetown team, they went to Maui, struggled mightily there. They lost a late lead against Maryland that they should have won that game. They didn't. And now this year they're 0-4 in the Big East so far, 8-8 overall. This team is they are struggling mightily right now. They need something to change next year. They need some more recruits. John Thompson III, I know John Thompson was a staple there, and I know their practice facility, I think, is named after John Thompson, but John Thompson III is just not getting it done. I just wonder if there's a thought from the Georgetown AD to move on, because for the past couple years, Georgetown just has not been that good. Ever since they lost in the NCAA tournament to Florida Gulf Coast, this program has really just gone downhill, and I just wonder if there's going to be a little bit of a changing of the guard over there in DC. But right now, Georgetown, my number four surprise so far this season.
That's actually my number three. And like you said, John Thompson III, ever since that loss to Florida Gulf Coast, they've been a mess, and people forget that they exist. I mean, how many of you actually remember that Georgetown is playing basketball right now? Because they haven't made any national noise whatsoever. And I'm looking at their schedule. They lose to Arkansas State at home, Maryland by a bucket, Wisconsin, Oklahoma State by 30. They did beat Syracuse on the road. That was good. But then, yeah, 4 straight losses: Marquette, Xavier, Providence, Butler. None of them the blowouts, but they're not playing good basketball. They're not a good defensive team. They're not scoring, although Rodney Pryor is good. But they're not a good team. And I think that they're starting to the floor is almost falling out from under them. I think they could be in an absolute free fall after this season. The Georgetown pride is not there for them right now for such a historic program. They're playing with no pride. They're hard to watch, really. I watched that Syracuse game. I have no idea how they won. They don't even look like a good basketball team. And I hate to be so blunt with this, but I mean, they're 8-8 right now. Like you said, they're 8-8, and they haven't won a game in the Big East. It's completely ridiculous. And for a team that's made the tournament 30 times and has 5 Final Fours, and won it all in '84 and almost again in '85. It's a historic program, and they're embarrassing the tradition that is Georgetown basketball. And personally, I would love to see them jump to the top again and have them to be a Tier 1 program again, because it would be great fun. When Georgetown plays well, it's fun. And since Otto Porter left, since that loss, they've been free falling, and I don't see the floor appearing and stopping their fall at any time in the near future. So that's my number 3.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that they're fun to watch when they're playing good basketball. They just haven't in the past couple of years. My number 3, though, I'm going out west. I'm going to the Pac-12 and USC. Andy Enfield has come in, and he has completely revitalized his program. It's taken him a few years, but giving him time has been great. They're 15-1 right now, 2-1 in the Pac-12. This team is good. Or excuse me, they're 15-1, 2-1 in the Pac-12. This team is good. They're making some moves out there in the Pac-12. They're finally in the rankings. They have some playmakers out there that are doing very well for them. Andy Enfield has come in. He's completely changed this program. They were in some dark days when Kevin O'Neal was there, and they were losing. They were getting blown out by UCLA every time they played them. That's a huge crosstown rival this year. That's going to be a really fun game to watch. They're tied for 3rd right now in the Pac-12 behind Arizona and Oregon. They're tied with UCLA. This is another team. Keep your eye on USC. They can come up with 1 or 2 marquee wins in the Pac-12. This is a team that can make some noise come March Madness.
I'm with you there, and I'm gonna tab the state of California for my number 1. But my number 2 right now, I love what I'm seeing from Creighton. I'm gonna be honest with you. Creighton is 15-1, and their one loss was a hard-fought game against the defending national champs in Villanova. And they have one good win, which was Wisconsin, and they won by double digits. And outside of that, they beat Nebraska on the road. That's not that great of a win. And then their conference wins are Seton Hall, St. John's, and Providence. But they've got a game against Butler coming up, and then they go at Xavier. They've got Xavier at home, and then on the road against Butler, and then they travel to Villanova. So they've got chances to have another marquee win to their resume to improve their tournament seed. But I mean, they're a top 10 team right now under Greg McDermott. And last year they came into Bloomington and they didn't look like a good team from what I saw. And, they looked a little discombobulated offensively and defensively for what it's worth. But right now they're passing the ball well. They're top 10 in the country in assists per game. They're scoring well, almost 90 a game at 88 points per contest. So, I mean, Creighton is playing good basketball right now. And it's kind of fun to watch. It reminds me of, the not so old days when Doug McDermott was dropping 28 a game for the Blue Jays. But I mean, Creighton's a quiet top 10 team right now, and I think they deserve some more storylines than they're getting.
Yeah, they nearly knocked off Villanova. I thought they were gonna do that, but they ended up falling there at the end. But my number 2, I'm gonna go to the Big 12 and a team that really has not been talked about whatsoever, and that is TCU. This is a team, Jamie Dixon has come in year 1, and he's completely changed this program. They were one of the worst programs in those big Power 5 conferences for quite some time. Nobody was talking about them. They gave Kansas a run for their money a few weeks ago. This is a team that I feel like could make some noise in a Big 12 conference that is interesting to, because they got Baylor and Kansas up there at the top. Then after that, it's Kansas State, West Virginia, Iowa State. There's some teams in there. Those 3 teams have been a little bit suspect this year. I know people are riding high on West Virginia. That's an interesting team. But TCU, that's an interesting team. I'm interested to see what they do as the Big 12 season moves on. I feel like they have a potential chance to be a bid stealer from another team that's on the bubble. So we'll see how they fare coming down the stretch of the season. But another team to keep your eye on is TCU. They've been a pleasant surprise so far.
And my number 1 is UCLA. I told you I'd go back to California. But my number 1 story is UCLA and how good they are and how explosive they are offensively. I know there are a lot of question marks on the defensive side of the ball for the Bruins, but I mean, their 7-man rotation is almost – their 6-man rotation is almost second to none. I mean, I'm looking at their roster. They've got 6 guys that play over 25 minutes a game and average double-digit points. And they've got 3 guys that are close to averaging a double-double in Thomas Walsh, Lonzo Ball, and TJ Leaf. I mean, these guys are almost averaging a double-double, and you factor that in with the sharpshooting of Bryce Alford. And offensively, I think this is what Indiana fans hoped the Hoosiers would be this year. And I don't think UCLA plays great defense. I don't think they'll win at all. And they've got a lot to prove. They did have a nice road win at Kentucky in November, early December. And then they bounced back from that by beating Michigan by almost 20, beat Ohio State, and then their one loss on the year was at Oregon on an incredible last-second shot. That's a tough place to play. So you can't really fault them for that. So this is a team that I think offensively the sky is the limit. But if they run into a Louisville at some point down the road in the NCAA tournament, that could be trouble, especially with the freshman phenoms and the lack of experience rather of this Bruin team. But right now, I mean, they deserve all the attention they're getting because they're playing great.
Yeah, and if you have not watched UCLA play, I think they're on right now. So after the show is over, you need to go watch them. They are a fun team to watch. They're playing Stanford tonight. That's a game you should definitely check out. But my number one team, I'm going to the Big Ten. I'm going the Minnesota Golden Gophers. This is a team I had no expectations for. They had a good freshman coming in Amir Coffey. I thought it was going to take them maybe another year to make that next step. I did not expect them whatsoever to be where they are. They're my biggest surprise in the entire country. They're 14-2. They're 2-1 in the Big Ten. Their only loss was to Michigan State in overtime. This is a team, they're beating Ohio State right now by 6. That's another game you could go check out after this is over. But I mean, this is a team that is impressive. They have come up with some impressive wins. They just went to Purdue. It took them overtime, but they got that win. They went to Northwestern, who is very good this year. Got a win there. Nate Mason is turning things on. 14.5 points a game, 5.9 assists per game. This is a team that's right up there in the Big Ten right now. They only have one loss. If they knock off Ohio State here on Sunday night, they'll be 3-1 in the conference, tied atop the Big Ten. This is another team that could cause IU some trouble, cause Purdue some trouble. They've already beaten them, but just this is a team that could, if they can stick up there in the Big Ten, it's an interesting team, and they are definitely a big surprise this year, at least for me.
Yeah, and that's a team that Pitino, his head was getting called for more or less before the season started, mostly because people were like, they're going to be terrible again. So I think this just further proves that he's not a good coach, and those arguments have been quickly flipped and made a quick 180. So they have a nice win, like you said, and then they got another good road win at Northwestern just the other night. So, I mean, that's a team to look out for going down the road. They could cause some mischief in the Big Ten. I certainly don't think they'll win the Big Ten, but they could certainly cause trouble and, finish in the top 6, top 5 of the conference if they continue this play. I think they're playing very, very well. I don't think they're that good. I don't think they're a top-tier team quite yet, but they're certainly off to a great start, and they could finish, like I said, top 5 in the Big Ten. But that'll do it for us tonight. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to our live audience for listening in. If you guys are listening on the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Twitter. We forgot to add our Twitter handles to this one, but you should know it by now. Josh is at Josh Eastern. I am at M_Dugan44, and together we are at the Hoosier Life. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy 2017. This is our first episode of the year. Plenty more to come, plenty more content to come. So stay tuned, and we'll see you guys next time.